Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with Manny Hill, just moments after Alabama failed to tie in overtime against Michigan. So Michigan moves on to the championship. And oh, look, their quarterback is in a bunch of mock drafts connected to the Minnesota Vikings. So, Manny, why don't we start by talking about that game and your impressions of JJ McCarthy after watching him overcome the Michigan special teams in order to win that football game and go to the college national championship.
Yeah, it was a hell of a game. Another classic Rose Bowl and a great finish. Uh, you know, I I was mildly impressed with JJ McCarthy tonight. I've been a little down on him, not because I didn't think he was good. I just wasn't really sure how good he was because that team there's just so much talent on that team. There's going to be double digit guys that are going to get drafted next spring off of that team, including JJ McCarthy. Um, and they spent so much of the season just dominating everybody, just blowing everybody out. Then they finally played a close game against Ohio State the last week of the season. So it was hard to really kind of get a read on like how good JJ McCarthy actually is because they didn't really ask him to do a lot because they were in control of so many of the games this year. But I was mildly impressed with him. I still have some questions about like, how good his arm actually is. Like, can he really make all the throws? Speaking from a Vikings perspective, can he make all of the throws that Kevin O'Connell will want him to make? Um, I know there's been, it seems like he's a really mobile guy that can get out and run, but I'm not sure like how much of that is going to actually translate to the NFL. Um, but he played well tonight. The he did get away with a pretty bad mistake, the first play from scrimmage in this game where he rolled out and looked like he was trying to throw the ball away and he threw it into the hands of an Alabama defender. The only reason why he got away with it because the Alabama defender was out of bounds. So, I guess you take that for what it is. But um, my main question about him was going to be like, all right, when the lights are big, when there's a high pressure situation, how is he going to handle that? He didn't handle it very well last year against TCU in the college football playoff. Made some mistakes in that game. Tonight, I thought he did a better job of that, of just kind of keeping his team together, going down on that long drive to tie the game, and then I don't know how much credit you want to give him for overtime. I mean, overtime was all Blake Corum pretty much with those two runs, but yeah, I thought he was solid. I don't know if it changes my thoughts on whether or not he'd be a fit for the Vikings at all. I mean, I think that's still kind of up in the air to kind of figure out. But I thought he was solid tonight, and it was a hell of a game.
And the other thing is too, this other biggest pass of the game on 4th and 2 was also a swing pass to Blake Corum, who was wide
Yeah,
open and took it, 35 yards from there. And their receiver did forget you can't push someone directly in the back, which is a rule that you learn when you're 6. But they made up for it. Roman Wilson, I think is the receiver's name, who made an unbelievable catch on a tipped ball after that to help Michigan win the game. I mean, my observation on JJ McCarthy is I think from a leadership and operational perspective, leading their offense, his confidence in their offense, they have a lot of motions. They have a lot of changes that are going on at the line of scrimmage that really make that offense tick. And you have to give credit to Harbaugh and his staff for Alabama's head was spinning in a lot of those moments where they're moving guys around, even on that play on 4th down where Corum starts on the left of the quarterback. They motion him to the right. They don't make the right check on defense. He's wide open and running. And that's all of that has to do with McCarthy at the line of scrimmage. I think they ask him to do at the line of scrimmage more than your average college quarterback. And because some of this could be influenced by Jim Harbaugh's previous experience in the pros and how much we see a lot of this stuff in the NFL all the time. So he's doing that. He was able to get the ball to his playmakers underneath that created big plays. One of their biggest plays of the game, the long touchdown, is a pretty routine crossing route where he hits them and he can lead his receivers on those crossing routes the same way that we saw Ohio State pump up a lot of quarterbacks the same way with it's like these crossing routes college defenses just freak out even on that tipped ball catch it was the same sort of thing where the receivers running wide open because they're crossing each other. The one thing I wonder about with McCarthy though is one, like how much of it is the underneath stuff. And if we're talking about a downfield passing offense for the Vikings,
Right.
how is that going to fit? Because you just don't see McCarthy push the ball downfield all that often. And a lot of the receivers are running, open underneath and then looking for yards after catch. They lean on their running back a lot more than they lean on their quarterback, which also kind of makes you go like, all right, is that there was some stat, and I know a lot of it's because they were winning, but there was some stat that he only had thrown 20 passes in the fourth quarter of games this year or something like that. Like you could tell that they have really leaned heavily on their running back. So if you're going to be Kevin O'Connell's quarterback, it is very clear that it's all on you. I went through this yesterday for my article at I don't know 2 a.m. or something. I was looking through the play-by-play writing after the game, and there were about 5 different opportunities where Kevin O'Connell had like a second and medium where he could have run the ball and passed on every single one of them. And like that what you're going to be asking somebody to do, and that's not what they ask JJ McCarthy to do. I also wonder about a superpower. So you mentioned the running ability, like Jalen Milroe. The running ability is obscene. The guy they said he hit 20 miles an hour more than anybody else this year. I mean, his passing is up and down. The rest of their team is up and down. But you could see like there's a playmaking running quarterback. That's what it looks like. McCarthy is more of a oh, if he scrambles at the right time, he's fast enough to get up to a high speed and make a play. But is that really like a dynamic element of his game? I don't think that it is. You don't see him dropping back, looking to run. It's more of if he has to scramble, he's quick enough to get some yards there. But I don't see that as like this will be a running quarterback. He's pretty good when scrambling or when on the move, like when he rolls out, he can throw some accurate balls, but I don't feel like he has amazing touch and I don't feel like he has an amazing like rocket howitzer arm. So what's the superpower when you look at the best quarterbacks in the league? All of them have Joe Burrow's got his accuracy and his playmaking. Lamar Jackson has gestures at everything. Like there's always this one thing. CJ Stroud, the way he throws the football, it is elite. So what is that about JJ McCarthy? That's why if you were making a comp to like Mac Jones, you could probably say that's pretty fair. I would even say someone like Desmond Ritter, who a lot of draft analysts liked, but had the same sort of thing where he was a great leader. He was a plus guy. He ran very fast in the combine, but there wasn't that one thing that made him special. And in the NFL, he's just kind of a guy. So that's still what I sort of see with JJ McCarthy. But there's no doubt that beating Alabama, regardless of how it happens, is impressive from the quarterback perspective.
Absolutely. And it's a lot of times it's how you handle being on the big stage with everybody watching and knowing what's at stake. You know what I mean? Everything that Michigan has gone through with all the controversy with Harbaugh being suspended for games and, McCarthy having to kind of navigate through that as a team leader, the talk about how they have performed in college football playoffs in the past, the previous 2 years, it didn't go well for them. So that was kind of hanging over his head too. And I think to just have the emotional maturity to be able to handle that, keep the team together, inspire your teammates to go out and make plays as well, I think is a plus trait for him. But yeah, you're right. I think it's just how are some of the things that he can do physically, how are they going to translate to the NFL? And from a Vikings perspective, is that going to fit what Kevin O'Connell wants to do with his quarterback and his offense? And I'm not sure it is.
Yeah, I think you can probably make both arguments because you could say that O'Connell really needs somebody at the line of scrimmage who's masterful at doing all the checks and changes. And it's sort of too bad that Nick Mullins can't throw a football very well because he can do all of that stuff, but just can't deliver the throws where they're supposed to go and how they're supposed to get there. So you could make that argument that, look, if McCarthy is going to be able to handle so much at the line of scrimmage because he's already done a lot of that in Michigan. I don't think it's a cheap offense. I don't think it's one of these like gimmicky, just spread them out and throw a bunch of bubble screens. Like, I think that he's having to do a lot of work there reading defenses, but there's nothing even close to NFL defenses in college. So
Right.
how you're able to do that, like, does it translate? That's a really hard thing to figure out. And the one thing that can balance that is like a rocket arm or great speed or whatever the thing might be that separates that quarterback from the rest. So I don't think that wherever you stood on JJ McCarthy, your mind wasn't changed here. If you're a little skeptical like I am, then you're not walking out of that going, oh my gosh, he just put up 400 and it was downfield passes. No, I mean, it was a lot of underneath stuff that turned into big yards after catch. But if you like him because of the way he operates the team, then you still like him because of the way he operates the team. And we're
Kyle
doing this.
Shanahan would like him. I think Kyle Shanahan would like him.
That might be, I mean, that might be the comp that you're looking for, though, right? Is like a Brock Purdy, which is, are we gonna talk about every guy who doesn't have a huge arm? Are we gonna do this? I mean, he's more physically gifted than Brock Purdy, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, he is. He's bigger. I think he does. I think he has a little bit of a stronger arm. He doesn't have a great arm, but I think his arm's stronger than Brock Purdy's is. I think for him, it's just going to come down to like where he ends up. You know, somebody's going to draft him. I don't know if he's going to be. I don't think he's going to be a first round pick, but like somebody's going to draft JJ McCarthy, and if it's the right system and it's the right coach, the right offensive mind that can kind of look at what he does really well and allow that to kind of translate to their offense, then I think he can have some success in the league and be in the league for a while. But it's going to depend on, I think, who ends up with him.
I'm already getting texts from Jeremiah Searles and Dane Mizutani about Michael Penix. So the chat is going to have to keep us updated for the beginning of this game. And we're going to go till, as we always do, around 9 o'clock. And of course, then we'll go watch the rest of the game, which is great because it'll be halfway through the first quarter. And it takes forever. They had the end of a basketball game there with 3 straight timeouts before we finally got the last play. But with Penix, regardless of what happens tonight, Penix is the guy that throughout this time, he's already got a touchdown. That's why. He is the guy that throughout the season I've watched the most of, and I feel like has A+ leadership and the arm, just the arm. I mean, the anticipation, the accuracy, and what you really see is, talk about a guy who's operating a lot of offense, doing a lot at the line of scrimmage, but it really is standing in the shotgun and throwing footballs all over the place. He's most of their offense. And that's why I've kind of stood on his side a little bit more than McCarthy's throughout this. And I'm interested to see how he plays the rest of the night. How have you felt? I don't know how much of Penix that you've seen, but I have felt more and more as this season has gone along that Penix is the type of quarterback that would really work for what Kevin O'Connell wants, because he's very good at hitting the underneath guy who's open. He's very good at not taking sacks, which is a massive deal to me. When college guys take sacks, I am very, very nervous. He barely ever takes sacks. He gets rid of the football, but when he has to throw it, this man can make a very serious throw downfield. So I don't know how much you've seen, but I am still very intrigued by the idea of Michael Penix.
Yeah, no, I like Michael Penix too. I watched him, quite a bit when he was at Indiana, before the ACL injuries and everything that he had, and he was really good and productive there. And that was at Indiana, that was much more of kind of a gimmicky type of offense that he was running with the Hoosiers a couple of years ago. And then when he transferred to Washington, they're kind of running a little bit closer to what they're doing in the NFL. But like you said, the arm is ridiculous. He kind of, in a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of Jeff George, like a left-handed Jeff George a little bit. Because you'd watch Jeff George. How many times did we see Jeff George just whip it, off his back foot and just whip it like 50 yards down the field? You know what I mean? Michael Penix can do a lot of those same things where you're watching him. He'll take the snap out of the shotgun and he's backing up because there's a rush coming towards him. and then the ball just whips out of his arm and it goes downfield like 40 yards, and he completes it for a touchdown. So he's got the arm is ridiculous. There are concerns about his mobility. I share those concerns too, because of the ACL injuries and everything that's really kind of hampered his ability to move around. He could actually move around pretty good before all of that when he was at Indiana, but not so much anymore after the injury. So I think that's going to be a question mark for him. But again, if Kevin O'Connell was looking for a guy that can have a rocket arm and really push the ball down the field, and like you said, doesn't take sacks, gets rid of the ball when he needs to, throws with anticipation and timing, then Michael Penix seems like the right fit there.
I was thinking last night when I was watching Jaron Hall just about how difficult it is when you don't have that elite trait. And that's the thing about Jaron Hall, is that he is a very mature guy who can throw the football okay and has okay athleticism and got drafted for those reasons. But there's nothing that gives him that answer. And one of the things about Michael Penix that I really like is he's humongous. Like you mentioned, Jeff George. And Michael Penix, I don't know what his height weight is. He has the biggest hands and the longest arms. Like this dude is pretty damn big. So it kind of reminds me, somebody said Jared Goff in the comments, kind of actually does remind me of Jared Goff, where it's this big dude with this big arm who can sling it. And that may be a very good fit for what the Vikings want to do. But also, if they lose this next game, Manny, against Detroit, which Kevin O'Connell said he's made the decision about who their quarterback is going to be, but he will tell us, I assume, on Wednesday who that's going to be. Personally, I think it's dangerous to Jaron Hall's health to put him back out there, so you might as well go with Nick Mullins. You've already made Josh Dobbs the third quarterback. How do you go back to him and be like, look, J-Dub, actually, can you just try again? I mean, you just can't do that. It has to be, in my mind, Nick Mullins. And after watching Hall, the amount of times he gets sacked, you just can't, you're risking him potentially just getting hurt. So that's what I think that they will do. But I had this feeling about the number of receivers who were open when we looked back at the game. They were there for him to make the plays, but it was a situation where you shouldn't really be trying to lean on him with a lot of, even if it's underneath routes, even if you are looking for yards after catch, they were leaning on him quite a bit. But that's just how it's going to be, right? And they need somebody who's capable of being that guy. And what is Penix in college? There's actually maybe a Phillip Rivers type of comp here with Penix, because it's that same sort of sidearm type of motion. People are bringing up Bo Nix. I was very upset, Manny, today. Why did they have a AAA team play against Oregon? Oregon was amazing, and they ran out whom? Again, Liberty? I really wanted to watch Bo Nix with a critical eye, the same way we're talking about JJ McCarthy. And instead, I watched him play a preseason football game against Tech. What are we doing here? I have liked Bo Nix as well. And I think Bo Nix does throw down the field a lot, does have a big arm. He is a legit athlete. He is a giant dude. His receivers are so open, though. I mean, so open all the time that I find it to be difficult to put a finger on. So Penix is 6'3", 250. Okay, so he's pretty big. He's pretty big. Yeah. That's like a threshold of you're a big dude. But Bo Nix, I just didn't get a chance to really evaluate him today.
Yeah, it's hard when you're going up against Liberty, a team that won all their games, but was in a group of 5 conference and not really all that good anyway. And that's kind of the tough thing about these bowl games, and some of the little stipulations that they put in were the highest ranked group of 5 team that, is undefeated or went 11-1 or something like that gets into one of these New Year's 6 games. Well, a lot of times when you do that, you get what we saw in the Fiesta Bowl today. So, Bo Nix, the physical traits are there, and I give him a lot of credit because things did not go well for him at Auburn, and he transferred and went to a place where he could have where he could kind of grow his game, develop, and get better with an offense that could be better suited for his skill set. And he answered the call, and he's another one of those like really high character guys. His story with his teammate that's like his adopted brother was a great story, and the bond that they have too is really cool. And he's got the physical traits, man. He's a good athlete. Now that's a guy that can run. Like as a quarterback, he's a guy that is really mobile, very quick, and can run and get to where he needs to get to where he needs to be. And he can make a lot of really good throws down the field too. To your point, though, he's throwing to a lot of guys that are defenders are not within 5 yards of them. And so it's a lot of like the throws look easy, but he is, to his credit, he's throwing them, they're right on the money. He's not throwing behind his receivers. He's not leading them too far. The guys are wide open, but he's hitting them right in between the numbers. He's throwing it exactly where it needs to be. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes to. I could see a fit here. I could see Kevin O'Connell looking at him and liking that athletic aspect of his game of moving around a bit too. But again, it's the arm talent. That's what Kevin O'Connell's looking for. And if you've got an arm that can push the ball down the field, I think it makes sense from a Vikings perspective.
All right, so here's a question. I got sidetracked, but I was going to ask, if the Vikings lose this game, they could pick somewhere around that top 10 range. I don't know exactly because there's a lot to still be decided, but ballpark. If you had the choice, Manny, and this, we are so far away from drafting people, but I just watched someone who might be drafted, so I'm excited to talk about this. And also, I don't want to discuss yesterday's game anymore, ever again. It was miserable. Great pregame meal, and that's all I can say about it. But if the Vikings are drafting, let's say 12th, let's just say, and you have the option between trading multiple first-round draft picks to move up to get Jaden Daniels, or staying where you are and taking whoever Kevin O'Connell likes the most between Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy, and Michael Penix, which would you do?
Oh, that's a great question. If I can get up into the top 5, depending on how much it would take in terms of draft capital, I would do it. Especially if you got an opportunity where, like, if the Bears take Caleb Williams number 1 overall, okay? And if you think you can get up to number 2, which I don't know is Arizona still sitting in the 2 spot, or who's sitting at number 2 right now? I don't know.
Might be the Patriots now. I think the Patriots are at the number 2 spot now.
Okay, well, yeah, then it gets a little tricky because they're probably thinking about if Caleb Williams goes 1 to the Bears, then Drake May is probably going to go 2 to the Patriots, I would think. But then, depending on who that number 3 team is, if you can get up into that spot and then Jaden Daniels is maybe there, I would do that. That's the route I would go. Now, if you don't think you're going to be able to get one of those top 3 guys, even if you move up, or if it's not feasible to move up because the spot you want to move into is with a team that also wants to take a quarterback, then I'm leaning Michael Penix at 12 because I think it feels like he would be the guy of that sort of that next tier after those top 3 guys. He would be the guy to me that would seem like to be the guy that Kevin O'Connell would want the most to fit into his offense.
This is a very tricky one because I think that Jaden Daniels is such a dynamic talent that he could be really special. He could be, and comparing anyone to Lamar Jackson, who's going to win his 2nd MVP, is silly. But really, though, I mean, the running ability, him and Anthony Richardson, so we didn't get to see it that much with Richardson, but those are the 2 best running quarterbacks since Lamar. And Daniels was absolutely dominant on the ground. But the thing is that Daniels is farther ahead by quite a bit as a passer from the other guys who are considered running quarterbacks. He's farther ahead as a passer than Lamar. He's probably farther ahead as a passer than even Jalen Hurts was. And we saw his massive improvement over a couple of years and how the running impacted. And then we'll see about Anthony Richardson, who already before he got hurt looked like he was improving as a passer in the NFL. But Daniel's a way better passer in college than Anthony Richardson was, and just as dangerous as a runner. The trouble is that I'm thinking about the whole roster for the future, and I know that you get the advantage of the cap space and everything else, but how many difference makers are on this team is something that I wanted to talk about tonight. We've gotten so into the draft talk that I'm already excited about that. But how many difference makers are on this team right now who we can surely say will be on the team in 2024? Justin Jefferson, he's under contract, folks. He hasn't demanded a trade, so he's on the team. Christian Darrisaw is a difference-making left tackle. Had a tough game against the Packers, but man, everybody did. Garrett Bradbury graded a 5, by the way. Kenny Clark will live in that man's nightmares forever. But who else? Jordan Addison right now is a nice player. I would not say he's like the game changer. You have him. You are scary to everybody else, right? Like he's good. He's good, but I wouldn't put him in that same category. And that's all I got, because Harrison Smith could retire or is not the same version of the guy he was. Danielle Hunter might not be here. Ivan Pace Jr., a nice player who can make a difference, but not that guy. So you got 2. And if you're trading multiple firsts to go up and get Jaden Daniels, and then you got to get other other like the difference makers that you want to use your first round picks on. And the one from 2022 is not the difference maker. And neither is the second pick in 2022 either. That's where it's a little bit hard for me. I do think that there's a big gap between the prospect talent, that Daniels is a much better prospect than the other guys, because they all have their reasons to be concerned. Like Bo Nix's history before this year was pretty meh, and Penix is older. He's had some injuries, and you could go down the list. We talked about McCarthy at the beginning of the show. I think that I would, even though it's not historically always the greatest idea to trade up. I mean, the Bears did it for Fields. The results have been pretty mixed. The Chiefs did it for Mahomes, though, and that worked out pretty well. Philadelphia did it for Carson Wentz because their roster was right there, very close to being a Super Bowl roster. But I think the Vikings is farther away. So that would be a very, 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 very tricky decision if that's what they have. But I also reject the idea that Jaden Daniels can't play for Kevin O'Connell. I think the way he throws the football, and then you add the running element, which O'Connell did not build anything offensively for a running quarterback because his quarterback was Kirk Cousins. So he would do that. He'd Google that. How do I deal with a running quarterback? He would figure that out. I promise. What do you think, Manny, that the Chicago Bears do with Justin Fields?
Well, what I think they should do and what I think they will do might be 2 different things. I personally, I think they need to move on, because I don't think that he has shown enough to indicate that he is going to be able to be a guy that they can have long term and get them in a position where they're contending for Super Bowls. I just don't see it. I think there is talent there, and I think he has shown some improvement, but I don't think we've seen enough improvement from him to think like, yep, this is the guy, we're going to pay him, and I got to make a decision on paying him, giving him a big contract. And you don't want to have a Daniel Jones with the Giants type of situation with Justin Fields, because then you're kind of stuck. But I'm starting to wonder if they're going to consider just keeping him around and maybe getting that number 1 pick from Carolina and trading down a couple spots to get more picks, much like what they did last year. I'm starting to wonder if they're going to do that, because they have seen some improvement from Justin Fields. And are they going to have it in their head like, all right, he's getting better now. If we get him this, and we get him this player, and we get this guy on defense and get these guys, then, Justin will be all right. He'll be fine. I think it's a dangerous gamble to make. I'm kind of thinking that that's the route that they may end up going, though. But I think that they should take that number 1 pick from the Panthers and just take the next quarterback and move on. And if you flip Justin Fields for like a 3rd or a 4th round pick, then so be it.
So, from following people who talk about the Chicago Bears, you would think that Justin Fields was in the MVP race. But when you look at the totality of what he's done this year, now his running cannot be ignored. It is truly
Mhm.
elite, literally all time great running when you look at what he did last year. So you can't just say, "Oh, well, he kind of runs." Like that's a big deal, and that got ignored sometimes. Weirdly, when you looked at the stats of someone like Cam Newton, he'd throw for 3,400 yards and then he'd run for 712 touchdowns and be like, well, look at his quarterback rating. So I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth because I always thought that Cam Newton was a winning player in a major part because of his running ability. So let's not downplay that. But Justin Fields is the 21st overall graded quarterback this year by PFF. He has 2,400 yards, under 7 yards per pass attempt, an 85 quarterback rating. Like all of that is very mediocre quarterback play from a passing
Yep.
perspective. His running is so good that you can make it up. But if I try to make the other side of the argument, if you look at as the team continue to improve around him, because they're going to make this argument in Green Bay about Jordan Love as well, that the more he got on the same page with DJ Moore and the more that they trusted each other, DJ Moore emerged as an elite wide receiver. And if you pair him with Marvin Harrison Jr., you might have like Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne type of situation here, or what they had with Atlanta, like a Roddy White, Julio Jones type of deal. And if you can pair receivers together, you can improve your quarterback's play by quite a bit. And think about it this way. If Justin Fields were to have Marvin Harrison Jr. as the top draft pick and then struggle again next year, you just draft somebody else or look for another quarterback to put in with these two elite wide receivers and try to go forward with that way. That's the argument against it. I mean, it's tough. Like Caleb Williams has more holes in his game than people thought was going to be the case, and that also
Mhm.
is what gives me pause as well. Because there's a part of me that wants to see, all right, what's it going to look like when Fields plays a full season with this defense playing like it has, their offensive line playing like it has, and two of the best wide receivers on earth. That might be pretty good. If he's even 5% better as a passer and the running game, then they're going to be a really good team. They have 7 wins. Like they're going to be a really good team. So I think it is a seminal moment for this franchise. But at the same time, what is dominating? What is dominating is rosters in the NFC. It's not just quarterbacks, it's rosters. And if you draft, imagine if they trade out of 1 to like 3 or 4, still draft Marvin Harrison Jr., and then pick like 9th. Oh my God. Like they're just
Yeah.
getting so much
Yeah.
talent. And so, or they trade it for another player. Like Ryan Poles is clearly love trading for players. So I think that it's not a bad idea if they actually stay with Justin Fields. And if he can't get them over the hump, they look elsewhere after that because their roster is just going to be so incredible at that point. It's tough though. Very
Yeah.
tough.
It is very tough. And I think it's just it's kind of like, I don't know if there is a perfect answer for them. It's almost like you just say, Ryan Poles, make whatever decision you make, and it just has to be the right one. It just has to work out. Like you can't, because there is sort of that. If you stand pat with the number 1 pick and you take Caleb Williams and things don't work out for him either because of some of the weaknesses that he's kind of shown this year, those things get exposed and he can't really translate it to the NFL the way, everybody thought it would. Now you're really in a tough spot because then what do? You've just like kicked away another, top draft pick that is not working out for you. And when you swing and miss on a quarterback, it can really, really set your team back and put your team in a situation where you're making moves to try and cover that up and make that up, which is kind of why the Bears are in the spot that they're in right now, because there's question marks about Justin Fields. If they had hit on Justin Fields, like if we just knew for sure, like this guy is awesome, he's going to be great, he's fantastic, then the Bears are in a really good spot because now that decision is pretty easy, but it's a tough spot. I'm fascinated to see what they do. If they, if they get Marvin Harrison and it works out, and then whatever that other top 10 pick is going to be, it could be somebody on defense to help. That they made a nice trade for Montez Sweat, and we saw what he was able to do in that defense, firsthand when they came to US Bank Stadium. So um, I will say this: the Bears are in a great spot. They're in a great situation to where there's a lot of options, and whatever they decide to do, it just has to be the right one. And if it is the right one, look out.
It's the Bears, so they always make the wrong one. Like, that's who they are. So right now, let me give you the order, and this is right now, so this can change, but I don't know how much it can change. So right now, it's Chicago with the number 1 pick, then Washington at 2. Great tank by Washington, by the way. They were bought by the guy who owns the 76ers, and then they tanked. It's good. Well done. Well done. That team's going to go someplace if they, well, I mean, they're in a spot where they could draft Drake May or Caleb Williams. That would be really good for them because since Kirk left, they have had nothing at quarterback, but they also passed up on Tua and Herbert to take an edge rusher. So I don't think they're going to make that mistake this time. So then you have New England after that, and New England has to draft a quarterback as well. So if it goes Harrison and then Caleb Williams, Drake May, then you've got Arizona, the Giants, the Chargers. The Giants, I think, are in a spot where they would draft Jaden Daniels at number 5, or at least they should. I mean, one of the biggest mistakes you could have made was paying Daniel Jones. So they've got to bail on that. But also, you could allow Daniels to sit for a year and rebuild that around Daniel Jones and build up the roster a little bit and give Daniels a year to progress, like with Patrick Mahomes or with Jordan Love for multiple years. But I still love that model, though. Like, I still think that's really smart when teams can do it. They just can't do it very often. The Giants would be the team that would be able to do that. Arizona is a wild card here. Like, do they want a quarterback to trade Kyler, or do they want to stick with Kyler and try to build that up in the same way that the Lions did with Jared Goff and build around a good but not truly legendary type of quarterback? I mean, already there is just so much drama with this. But how, if you're the Vikings, my question is, they're 12th right now, the Vikings, and there's 4 teams that are 7-9. Wow. Even if you're able to get toward the top of that, like 9th, how do you end up getting someone to trade you any of these positions to get the quarterback when all these teams need them at the top? So that's why I think it's very, very difficult to see them being able to take someone in that top 3. But if you're Chicago, it's like, man, you're good if you, no matter what you do, but you're also going to be second guessed if it goes wrong. If you stick with Fields and he comes out next year the same way he did this year, fumbling around, and you win 7 games next year, everyone's going to go, oh my gosh, you passed up on that other quarterback. Or you could look like a genius because Marvin Harrison Jr. is unbelievable and they win, 14 games or something. The thing is, they were able to get to 7 after that horrific start and how bad they played, and at like rebuilding that team. That it's been a very impressive, very, very impressive second half of the season for the Bears. The other thing I want to talk with you about, Manny, is the Vikings' needs outside of the quarterback position, because if you think that this is a lot of quarterback talk, oh, buddy, we're going to have a lot of time to talk about it. And whether we're talking about it through April or just March is the big question. But what would you say if I were to ask you 3 biggest things the Vikings need that are not a quarterback and how they can get them? What do you got? What's your list?
Well, one for sure, I think interior defensive front, I think is one, and it's not that unit is necessarily bad because they've for the most part been really good against the run this year. But I think they need more of like an impact pass rusher to come from the interior to get a little bit more of a push to get in the face of quarterbacks, in situations where, okay, if let's say Daniil Hunter is brought back for next year, if Hunter is having a tough time getting a pass rush, you know what I mean? Can somebody else kind of pick up the slack? And somebody on that interior front kind of pick up the slack and get some pressure up the middle. So that's one. That's where I would like to see some improvement there on the defensive side. Probably number 3 wide receiver is probably one that I think you might have to look at. I know TJ Hawkinson is kind of I guess, kind of the de facto number 3 guy, number 2 guy in that passing attack, but like a true number 3 wideout because it looks like KJ Osborne is not going to be back. Brandon Powell showed some signs, I think, of, being a guy that you could rely on, but like, is he going to be back? How much improvement will we see from him as well? So that might be a situation where, or they might want to look at that. I'm trying to think of, I guess you can never have too many corners. You know what I mean? I know they've got some young guys that have shown some signs. But if you can get, another guy in here just to kind of add some depth to the cornerback position, I think that'll be helpful too.
Yeah, for me, the interior defensive line with the pass rush is a great point because I don't remember the last time that it was good. I mean, it must have been 2018 with Sheldon Richardson is the last time it was difference making. They brought back Richardson in 21, but he was not the same. And there was a lot of Shamar Stephen. A lot of Shamar Stephen. It's just like Shamar Stephen is just like Jonathan Bullard, where I like the guy. I think he's very useful. But there's been a lot of Jonathan Bullard, and that's probably too much when
Yeah.
you're talking about pass rushing situations. You can't always just blitz. You can't always just move Danielle Hunter around, which I've liked that Flores is doing that. He had a great pass rush on Jordan Love on one play over the center, but you're going to have to find someone who can get consistently to the quarterback, even if it's just a rotational player. They didn't even have a rotational player who could do that and from the inside. That is a big deal to me, even just to find one of those dudes who's played for like 5 teams but gets enough pressures per year and a handful of sacks and so forth. They don't even have that guy. But the biggest thing is what's happening at edge rusher. If Danielle Hunter is staying, it's gonna be expensive. This man has 15 and a half sacks. He has, at last check, 74 pressures, which is up toward the top of the NFL. And I was trying to investigate the prices of edge rushers. And it kind of splits into 2 different types. The mega rusher, the TJ Watt, the Nick Bosa, these guys, there is no chance you could pay him and pay Jefferson and pay Christian Darrisaw and build a complete roster. I just don't know how you're going to do it.
Right.
And that might just be too much and too risky for a guy that still does have the injury history. There's like this other level, though, of Hassan Reddick, Shaq Barrett, guys who have had big sack seasons that were a little bit later in their 20s that got more reasonable contracts. And if Danielle Hunter is willing to go for that, which is more in the 20-something range, more of like the 30-something guaranteed range, I think the Vikings can do that. But they can't do the elite type of pass rusher. And I think if you're another team that feels like you're a pass rusher away, how are you not offering Danielle Hunter that? And they cannot franchise tag him, which is very important that they put in his contract. No franchise tagging me, buddy. So they've got to make that decision. Also, it might be his decision. If somebody didn't buy into you for like 4 straight years to sign you to the big deal, are you going to give them first priority? Now, maybe Danielle just likes it here. I'm kind of feeling like he's going to go somewhere else, which means 2 edge rushers are very much needed. And when you bring up corner, that was really revealed. I like a lot about Mekhi Blackmon. We saw the weaknesses of a Caleb Evans really play out over the last few weeks. He got absolutely cooked against the Packers. He missed tackles. Like, he had a really tough ending to the season. And Byron Murphy Jr. is a good player, but I want him as more of a nickel than I do this, hey, you go guard the other team's best wide receiver. You'd rather have some of these guys rotating in than being like the guy. So you kind of need that as well. And then the wide receiver you mentioned, that third wide receiver spot, I think, is very valuable. And we don't know how long TJ Hawkinson is going to be out because it wasn't just an ACL, it was an MCL as well. That could take him into the middle of next season, possibly. And look, Johnny Munt's a fine NFL player, belongs in the league, but it's not TJ Hawkinson when it comes to making difficult catches that are way behind him or whatever. That wasn't Johnny Munt's fault. He didn't deserve that, but he's not a difference maker. Josh Oliver's not a difference maker. So you're going to need somebody else to kind of bridge that gap until TJ Hawkinson is back to 100% for next season. It's not actually that easy to find your number 3 wide receiver in free agency because teams keep good wide receivers. For one, they know how valuable they are. But guys who are like KJ Osborne, I don't think Osborne's going to get a huge deal, but guys who are like him, they usually get a decent amount of money. Like Jacoby Myers got a decent amount of money. Adam Thielen, who is really a number 3 at this point in his career, he tracked down a decent amount of money. You're probably spending like 10 million. And then you have to decide what you're doing at guard. Are you bringing back Dalton Reisner as well? And I think what this all ties into, I asked you for 3 and I've named like most of the roster. What it really ties back into, Manny, is when we talk about Kirk Cousins coming back, some people are very sure Kirk Cousins is coming back. I have a very difficult time making that work with all the things that you and I just named.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you know where I stand, and this is not a shot at Kirk. I'm not trying to say he's bad or anything like that. Well, first of all, there's just kind of this unknown of what he's going to look like when he comes back from this Achilles injury, and he's going to be a year older. He's going to be 36. And I just think that with where this roster is at, with where this team is at going forward, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to bring Kirk Cousins back unless he's going to come back on a massive, massive discount. And we have never known Kirk Cousins to give anybody a massive, massive discount. Even when they've restructured, it's been to free up a few $1,000,000 here and there to free up cap space. But his cap number has always been large for as long as he's been here. So even if he's gonna say, hey, I'll come back for 28 to 30 billion instead of like 40, like what Daniel Jones is getting, like that's still a pretty hefty number, considering all the other needs that you're gonna have with the roster and having to pay your superstar wide receiver and your star left tackle as well. And and if Danielle Hunter does want to come back, like you want to bring him back. If it's a decent number and he wants to be here, you want to bring him back. So there's just too many, there's too many other, needs and financial commitments that are going to need to be made to I think bring back Kirk Cousins at the price that we think that he's probably going to get. It just doesn't make a lot of, financially, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to, with where this roster is at.
So just pulling this up right now, and I haven't really done this because we've been like horse blinders into the playoff race and the season and so forth. So I haven't really gone and looked like, okay, what, is the price and so forth for Kirk Cousins. And I just counted up real quickly. So if I made a mistake off one, I'm sorry, but I believe there are now 13 quarterbacks in the league who are making 40 million plus. And some of those include Daniel Jones, Deshaun Watson, the worst contract of all time, but Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray. Now, these are guys that I think we might say Kirk Cousins is at least comparable or better than for some of them. Daniel Jones for sure. Maybe depends on your feeling on Kyler Murray. I think we all know that the ceiling is higher for Kyler Murray than Kirk Cousins, but as far as consistent season after season, that has not been the case with Kyler Murray. He's kind of had his moments. He's not in the same range as a Mahomes or a Josh Allen. He may consider himself in the same range as a Stafford or Dak Prescott. Again, in my opinion, those guys are a shade ahead. Stafford, at the way he's playing this year, is probably 2 shades ahead. Well, I guess the same with Prescott. Both of them are sort of playing at really high levels. But still, based on their histories, there's a lot of numbers and a lot of really good play. But if you compare their numbers to Kirk, just traditional stats, you're going to find a lot of similarities. So how is he going to walk into a negotiation? He's also been, Derek Carr for a long time was the comp. He's also been quite a bit better than Derek Carr over the last couple seasons. He's going to have to argue, I'm better than Derek Carr, who's making 37. So I'm better than Daniel Jones. I'm better than Derek Carr. I'm in the same range as Stafford and as Dak Prescott. And the thing is that Matthew Stafford's deal is one the Vikings could do with Kirk. If you look at it, the structure is really interesting. All they did was push everything into the future. They took all of his money. It's actually crazy. I'll pull it up and I'll read it to you because it's nuts what they did with Matthew Stafford. And this is what happens when your quarterback wins the Super Bowl. You just go crazy. So he only has a $13 million dead cap for last year. Only $13 million for last year and only 20 for this year. Now, if Kirk Cousins had cap hits of 13 and 20, then you'd feel like you're in great shape. The problem is next year, Matthew Stafford's cap hit is 49 million, and then it is 50 and then 49. And if you cut him, next year it's an $86 million dead cap hit. The year after that, $37 million dead cap hit. So if you are willing to push all the money down the road into the future and either add crazy void years or take like the risk of like if he gets hurt again or something, just having like no option other than his huge cap hit, you could do it. But to me, Manny, you only do that if you're in a Super Bowl window. And I think what we really
100%.
saw in the last few games is that this team is not in a Super Bowl window yet.
No, they're not. And you know, you have to be smart with this stuff. You can't just say, well, look at how Kirk was playing before he got hurt, and and look at how bad these backups have been. If Kirk were playing, this team would be this, have this. I mean, you bring Kirk Cousins back, it's not going to, all of the other issues that this team needs that we just talked about a few minutes ago. Kirk Cousins isn't going to fix those things. And with him being 36 and coming off a major injury, is he going to be able to cover up those weaknesses, the way we've seen other great quarterbacks do? We saw Aaron Rodgers cover up weaknesses in the Packers roster for many, many years. Patrick Mahomes has done that. Now we're seeing this year, there's just, particularly on offense, there's just way too many weaknesses in the Chiefs offense for even Mahomes to overcome, as we've seen their struggles this year. So you have to ask yourself, like, is this a roster that can go on a deep run if you bring Kirk Cousins back? If it is, then by all means bring him back. I mean, I'm all for that, but I just see too many holes on this roster to have that be an option. And we have to remember, this team started out 0-3 and 1-4 with Kirk Cousins playing at quarterback. Like, I know he was playing really well before he got hurt, and they were on their way to being, winning that game against Green Bay and improving their record to 5-4, and who knows where they'd be at if Kirk were still healthy. But that was still the team that had a bad start to the season, and that was on his watch. So it kind of shows that this roster, there are good pieces here, and I think they're headed in the right direction. I think they've got the right people running the show. But we need more. The roster still needs work, and you're not going to be able to fix that by just bringing Kirk Cousins back on a cheaper deal. There's still other moves that need to be made.
Michael Penix, by the way, 5 for 7 for 138 yards so far. So he's off to a pretty good start. And Washington leads Texas 14-7, which we'll wrap up shortly because both of us really want to watch. Although this hour has just flown by. Like when you get into the quarterback thing, I mean, we just start rolling. But when you really lay it out, when you really just write out the roster, put it out on paper, you encircle the things that you need. It's just hard to get around to. They're right there. And that might be the lasting legacy of the Packer blowout of New Year's Eve is it was on display just how many things you really need. Because if you lose one or two defensive players, you shouldn't go from a really great defense to a horrific defense that easily could have given up 50. If Jordan Love doesn't miss a couple open passes early in the game, that thing could have been 28-0 at half, or by the end of the first quarter, it could have been. They were not stopped at all. And look, that, it's Brian Flores did a great job this year. I will not come off that. They'll probably finish in the top 15, which is better than I think I would have expected, and maybe the best case scenario for what they have as a roster. But that's the point, right? Like if your only answer is we have to have our defensive coordinator do everything under the sun. And oh, by the way, he's got to do it against a run of quarterbacks that weren't all that good. And it's not that it doesn't count to shut out Aiden O'Connell, but it certainly helps that it's Aiden O'Connell, right? And when it's a Jordan Love offense that's been cooking, then all of a sudden you look different. And when you look at the defense, every time they played a good team and a good offense, they had problems. And the Packers, sort of the exception, but they looked way, way better this time than they did last time. And that to me should be the difference maker, along with the quarterback class that I think has enough prospects to pick your choice. If you got from three different guys that you like who could be there, if it's Nix, Penix, and McCarthy, does any one of them float your boat as a guy who could step into that role? So we are set up for a lot of very interesting discussions as we go forward. I was just going to ask Manny, and I know that we got so far deep into this, but I just want to end with a little brief discussion, and I want to pull this up here. ESPN's playoff machine. Hold on, I want to pull up our playoff machine so we can take a look at what these playoff matchups look like. And so right now, let's run through. I'm just going to run through to end the show here. Who you think will win if the playoffs end up this way, which who knows how they will. But if they end up this way, how it's going to go, I want you to pick it. So right now, Philadelphia would play Tampa Bay as the 5 versus the 4. Let's just start with there. I'll just start from kind of the bottom and work our way up. Or no, I'm sorry. Let's start on the other side of the bracket. The 7 versus the 2. Green Bay versus Dallas in the 7 versus the 2, a game that I really wish John Madden and Pat Summerall were calling. Aikman versus Favre, Romo versus Aaron Rodgers at Dallas. Who do you think would win that game if that happens?
I think the Cowboys would win. The Cowboys have been kind of up and down, but I think they're the better team, and the Packers have looked a little bit better of late. But I think Dallas wins that game. Dallas is a different team at home this year. They've been fantastic at home, and I think they'd get it done.
I do have McCarthy concerns. I do. That there's going to be just like run the ball 3 times and we never have that debacle. And we're not talking the way we are about the Lions as if they won that game. All right. The Lions would play the Rams. That's a
Sign me
up. The league is rigged.
Sign me
Manny,
up.
the league is rigged. They rigged this up. That's why the refs did it. That's why they screwed with the eligible receiver.
That is the number. I was thinking about that when you texted me earlier today. I was thinking about like the number 1 playoff matchup I would want to see for Wild Card Weekend, and it's that one. It's the Rams and Lions. It's a great matchup. I think we'd see a lot of fireworks between both offenses because both offenses are really good. Both quarterbacks are really good. There's so much, the storylines, the history. Matthew Stafford going back to Detroit for a playoff game. I mean, like, come on, like the Lions' first home playoff game in forever, and Matthew Stafford still is going to play in it. Like, how great is that? Jared Goff going up against Sean McVay, like all of that stuff. If that's the matchup, sign me up. I'd be all for that.
Never stop scripting the NFL, Roger Goodell. Never stop. That's a great one. I'd pick the Rams. I just think that they're playing great football, and the Lions defense scares me. It's just, unless people are throwing the ball directly to them like Nick Mullins, it's not a good defense. How about the other side? Jags and Browns. Joe Flacco versus Trevor Lawrence, who's like barely alive still after the season, the way he's been beat up.
Yeah, I would take the Browns in that one. I know Jacksonville would be at home, but the Browns Joe Flacco's playing well enough, and that Browns roster is loaded, man. They've got receivers, they've got an offensive line, they can run the ball, their defense is amazing, and Joe Flacco's doing just enough to just have them win games. And so I would and Jacksonville just hasn't, whether it's Trevor Lawrence being banged up and they just have not looked good in like a month and a half. And so I think the Browns have a lot more momentum, and I think they'd go into Jacksonville and win.
Jacksonville just did not quite take the step that we thought they were going to. Offensive line is a problem. Defense is still problematic, and Trevor Lawrence takes way too many hits. And so maybe that's kind of a next year type of thing. Now, Miami would play Indianapolis, which I think we would both easily pick Miami for that one.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have a lot of juice to it because it's Gardner Minshew. And we'll see if somebody else gets in, because if the Texans win, they get in, then all of a sudden that game could be very, very interesting. And I might pick the Texans to upset Miami, because Miami is just, I think Tua's a great quarterback, and but they are a little frail on the defensive side, and they're a little frail when anything goes wrong. Like if
And they
everything that
just
their coach is,
and they lost Bradley Chubb. Bradley
yes,
Chubb is out
right,
for the year. That's a huge blow to that defense.
and Jalen Phillips is out for the year. So you're missing your two edge rushers. I think Xavier Howard's hurt. I mean, they're in tough shape. And whenever something from their coach is not quite working, it's not like they have some other answer on that team. So I would probably pick the Houston Texans with CJ Stroud. And then how about this? If it went down like it's set up right now, Buffalo KC. I mean, come on, Jim Kelly, Joe Montana, Arrowhead Stadium. Let's go.
Mahomes and Allen, man, sign me up. It's just it would be those two teams have kind of become like the modern, well, I guess modern like 49ers Packers. Like remember back in the 90s, the 49ers and Packers played each other like every year in the playoffs. I mean, they've played like 12 or 13 times in the postseason, overall, but like back in the 90s when it was Brett Favre and Steve Young, like it was great. And I think with Buffalo and Kansas City, we're seeing a lot of the same type of thing with Allen and Mahomes, just that rivalry of two of the great young quarterbacks in the league, and two of the teams that have been, the most contending teams out of the AFC the last few years as well.
So Super Bowl pick is right now very obvious, I think, in both conferences. There is a clear-cut best team, Ravens, 49ers. They're going to be the 1 seeds. And if you're picking low key, though, I might go, if it's like a total surprise, total upset, would be Buffalo and Los Angeles, because both of them have great quarterbacks. Both teams stumbled in the middle of the season, but are actually really strong football teams. That would be like, how about for you? Like if it was one of those where you go, "Whoa, who saw this coming? This is crazy." Who would it be for you?
Dude, Joe Flacco and the Browns, dude. Listen, I'm flabbergasted by what Joe Flacco is doing, but at the same time, you think about it, that roster, that's a really good roster. What the Browns have, especially on defense, and a defense. If you have a really good defense and it travels well, if they can get a matchup with Baltimore. I know Baltimore is so good, with Lamar and that defense too, but it's two division rivals that know each other really well. There's so much history there with the Browns and Ravens, and the Browns just put together one day of like really good football. Who knows what could happen. Yeah, I think the Browns are going to be a team to watch. How much gas in the tank does Flacco have? I think it will depend on that. But yeah, and I like, Buffalo and the Rams too, is two teams with great quarterbacks and both really, really good head coaches too. This is gonna be a lot of fun. I like Baltimore and San Francisco too to come out of both conferences, but I think we're gonna see a lot of really fun games this postseason. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Okay, we've got to get to this game, but just 2 quick things that people asked about that I want to. Oh my gosh, Penix is making more throws. He's making the case. He's making the case. I'm just seeing it in the chat, and I'm also getting text messages because everybody knows by now that Penix is my guy. So I'm getting all these texts like Penix has a cannon. Oh my God, Dane Mizutani just texted me. So yeah, it's going pretty well for him. Just Russell Wilson as an option for the Vikings. I'm not really into that. Manny, are you into
I
that?
don't. No, I don't like that. I don't think it's a fit. I don't. Russ played better this year, but I just don't. I just don't think, philosophically with what Kevin O'Connell likes to do, I don't know if Russ is really a fit at this stage of his career.
6 for 8, 190 yards for Penix. 6
Oh
passes,
my God.
190 yards. That's what I'm talking about. And the other one was Len asked, and I lost it in the chat, but asked if about the owners not going to the locker room, which our guy Alec Lewis mentioned in his article. Here's what I know about the Wilfs. It's sort of like Minnesota, Wisconsin, how if you get the axe, you feel a lot better about the year. If you beat the pack, the Wilfs feel a lot better. Games against the Packers usually mean action from the Wilfs. Like, think about the 2 times, like in 2020, they beat the Packers, they don't trade anybody. Same thing happened this year. And then in 2019, they lose to the Packers, and the Wilfs nearly traded Mike Zimmer to the Cowboys. And I still believe that was actually going to happen if the Vikings had lost against the New Orleans Saints.
They
And
fired Brad Childress after getting blown out at home by the Packers in 2010.
exactly. The Packers mean something very different to the Wilfs. And also yesterday, the executives from the Packers, and I don't know that I've seen this happen. They sat close to me in the press box and celebrated like crazy with every big play, which usually you don't see that much in the press box. Maybe they're in a different place in the stadium, or they kind of like keep it to themselves. Like Rick Spielman would sit behind me in Chicago, and Kwesi sits pretty close to me in Chicago too. You don't hear anything. Like they'll sometimes get up and pace, but usually like maybe some like if there's a bad play or something. But usually they kind of keep it. It had to burn them that those guys were like high-fiving after touchdowns and stuff. They had to be very upset that was happening. So anyway, can Michael Penix stay healthy in the NFL? I have no idea. Most quarterbacks seem to get hurt, but I'm picking the cannon. Give me the cannon. Let's see what we can do with it. So anyway, well, this has been super fun, and sorry, Manny, to keep you from the game even longer here. We gotta go watch some Michael Penix
That's
here
fine.
because he is going absolutely off. So thank you everybody for watching. Huge crowd tonight. Appreciate all of you. Make sure you subscribe to every single thing we do and buy my book. There you go. And we'll be back on Thursday night live, but the channel every night has episodes. So we'll have Jeremiah Searles tomorrow night. Look out for an episode with Brian Murphy. Lots of discussion about this very now fascinating off-season football team as we go. So thanks, Manny, and thanks everybody for watching / listening. We'll catch you next time.